Okay, off we go. Hello, everybody. Hope you're having a good day. Carlos, Biddle, welcome. How is everybody doing today? Carlos, where are you at the moment?
So I am one of the few people, coming to the office today. So I just wanted to have a nice background for the show. So I guess a
Yeah,
quiet place. So I guess the best
nice.
place was here. Yeah. What about you guys?
Yeah,
Yourself?
awesome. I'm in London. It's still warm. I'm just still crazed at how warm it is, but it does get dark. I was coaching last night, making my athletes do kind of tire flips in the dark, which they appreciated to remember there's a lot of spiders where we train, so they couldn't see them. Biddle, how is it on your
Mm.
end?
I'm here in my suburban hideaway that I always am in Eastern Washington. But Carlos, your forest green looks very soothing. You need like one of those sound machines that give you like earthy dulcet tones behind you in the background as you work today.
Oh wow, I think that's very insightful. Thanks for the tip.
Yeah, definitely. It's good coming from the office. I like going in. It's getting more normal, which I hope everybody is going back to the offices and enjoying kind of being able to work with their colleagues again. As always, me and Biddle have never met in person, which is a sad topic for me. So
Mm,
one day we'll get to hang out. Okay, let's kick off.
absolutely.
So welcome everyone to the Keys to AWS Optimization, the show where we share stories, concepts, and solutions to help you unlock your cost optimization at AWS. My name is Stephanie Gooch, or Steph Gooch. I am a commercial architect at AWS, and I focus specifically on all things cost for telco customers in Europe.
Hi, I'm Michael Biddle. I'm our co-host and colleague here, a commercial architect helping support our strategic account segment. Been doing this with AWS for about 8.5 years now, and love doing this every week, seeing what kind of education we can help pass along.
Nice. And with us today is Carlos Galan. He is a business development manager. Carlos, do you want to give everyone a kind of quick introduction and your origin story? Just a minute origin story about a bit of background about yourself.
Sure. So I am a business development manager for the cloud economics team in the EMEA region for AWS. In particular, I'm a member of the cloud financial management function. And what we do is to provide strategic advisory to help our customers visualize, predict, optimize, manage, and govern your cloud spend on AWS. A lot of things there. And I have a sort of a hybrid background. So I started my career on the more technical side, including working for Ericsson for 3 years, going through data centers in sub-Saharan Africa, working with the telcos over there. That was a very interesting time. And then I did an MBA and then moved to the more business side, to the opposite, right? So doing a little bit more of 3 years in corporate strategy for Samsung Electronics here in London before moving into a more hybrid role. Not this what I've been spending for the last year, including a role with a company in the customer engagement and loyalty space before joining AWS.
Nice. We should chat about telco. You've got a lot of history in it. I should come to you for some telco advice. Love it. I didn't know that before. Okay, so
Mm.
today we are chatting all about forecasting and budgeting. So looking to the future, how to make sure that there's less surprise and more control. I think that's a kind of great saying. So if you have any questions specifically around budgets and forecasting, please feel free to put them in the comments. Any suggestions of things that have worked well for you, we'd love to hear them. And as always, any kind of generic questions about cost optimization, we can try and answer them as best we can, or at least give you some resources. So this is quite an interesting area because Carlos, you really look into this quite a lot with customers. So can you give us maybe an overview of why you think forecasting and budgeting is really important for customers to kind of take seriously and start looking at as soon as they can?
Sure. So when it comes to cloud financial management, which is what we do, the very first thing that we recommend our customers to do is to take care of their visibility, right? So you want to be able to not only understand how much you're spending, but also understand on what exactly you're spending and who's spending on what as well. And then you take all this data, you perform the right cost allocation, whether that is business units or cost centers, teams, as the customer wants to do it, reporting to all the stakeholders. No, that's step pretty much zero. Sorry, zero like this here. There you go. And then once customers can see all this information, there's a natural tendency to want to start implementing cost optimization right off the bat, right? So is whether that is using less or using the same but paying less, or using something different to achieve the same outcome but in a more cost-efficient way, which is the modernization sort of bit. So you feel like a child in a candy store, lots of options, lots of
Yeah, I want to do
opportunities,
everything.
right? However, I guess due to the variable spend nature of operating in the cloud, there is an important step that we usually recommend our customers to look at before going into cost optimization mode or anything else, which
Right.
is what we like to call the cloud financial predictability,
Okay.
right? And this has two steps to it, which I think you already gave a hint at the beginning of the show. So on one hand, you want to help you set expectations across the organization, right? So you want to give cost objectives to the business engineering teams in order to define what good looks like, right? So what should we be aiming for? And you do this by predicting AWS spend, which is done through forecasting, which is the first sort of part of this cloud financial predictability.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the other hand, you also want to track spend on a granular basis, also on a regular basis against those set objectives that you had in the first bit, with the
Right.
aim to provide timely reporting to drive awareness and, most importantly, decision making, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or corrective action if needed. And you do this via tracking and controlling, no? And this is pretty much what budgeting is all about, and it's the second part of cloud financial predictability. So I personally see this as an extension of the visibility phase.
Right.
And the idea of this is to mitigate surprise risk. No,
Mm-hmm.
it's just like the title says, less surprises, more control.
Yeah.
And then once you have this in place, then you can focus on the more strategic bit, which is like cost optimization, your change
Yeah.
management, and all of that.
But you need to have that
Mm.
awareness. I like that, bringing that in, because normally sometimes when I think about it, I think of like cost visibility and then budgeting like as separate entities. But yeah, I like to think about it as you're looking at your costs, and now how do you track those spends and how are you matching with budget? And something I wanted to go a bit more in detail with, when you mentioned kind of setting those expectations, who, and Biddle, feel free to like weigh in with customer experiences you've had around having these conversations. Who needs to be in the room when you're setting these budgets?
Hmm.
Biddle,
Well,
go
that's a
for it.
very good
Oh, you
question.
go, Carlos.
No, I don't mind. If you want, Michael can have a crack at it.
Carlos, you go.
Oh, I go.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. So I would say anyone who touches the cloud, honestly. So there's some people, there's some teams in the organization who can do the forecasting for sure. And that depends on what sort of forecasting you do. We can talk about that more if you want. But ideally, the people who should be aware, most importantly, are the people who are handling the workloads. No, they need to understand what their target is and how they should be tracking against that. No, and that's my honest opinion.
Yeah, I'll add to that. So Steph, we've talked before. I've worked with AWS customers all the way from I'm not on the AWS platform yet, and I'm looking at migrating to, hey, I'm only spending like $2,000 a month with AWS, all the way up to, millions of dollars a month plus.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that I've seen that's very common with all these customers, I'll take it to a specific example, which is like reserved instance management. A customer that doesn't have the insight available where they can see which teams are responsible for which instances are running 24/7 in their environment, or necessarily like what the CPU metrics and percentages are for their CloudWatch instances on these EC2 workloads. They tend to take upwards of 3 to 4 times at least as long to come to a decision on what they're going to either procure, commit to, or streamline within their environment than the customers who have this insight. So you see, it doesn't matter how much environment you're running, unless you have these controls in place, we're getting insights back to who are the owners on the engineering side for these instances and how often they're being used and to what extent. You're going to have paralyzation within your industry. And so 2 weeks extra of time to come to a decision could be millions of dollars of impact, right? Depending on how much on demand you're running. And so outside of just the pure cost savings this will drive, I look at this from a business agility standpoint. And so to your question specifically, who should be involved? You need to have an IT subject matter expert that is close to the workload itself that's being ran, that can give the background of why it's being used, what the business case it's used for, along with either someone from the FP&A finance procurement team or a specific financial BU leader that can then take what you've goaled against for the beginning of the year and kind of reconcile it against where it's going throughout the process. So at least those two functions. I think we did a different call here on one of our shows, maybe not, we'll dive into it later, on building a cloud center of excellence. But I would recommend that we go back to some of the documentation we've shared there too.
Yeah, I don't know if we have done a CCOE one. That should be. We'll put that in next season.
All
We're
right,
looking
next
for a
show.
CCOE. Next show we'll do it. Yeah, and just to add on to that, I mean, for some experience, definitely remember at a time before we didn't include the people that need to be included. So we didn't include the developers, how much of a nightmare that was, or the developers didn't talk to the application owners. So someone's put in the chat here, try to ensure workloads or application owners are involved when setting the budgets, because somebody signed off on that application being built. There is a number, I'm sure, somewhere written down that says we're going to spend this much, and that number on that Excel sheet needs to get into your kind of Amazon account. And maybe we'll move on to the tools next about what kind of things are native with AWS. But what that number needs to go over. Otherwise, there's this mass difference in communication, and people are overspending where they don't need to, or they've budgeted too much, and then they find out later that they've don't need to spend all that, and it's kind of mixing up and there's less education going on. But I've kind of rambled there, but just again emphasizing what these two guys have said, that you need to get everybody involved, because otherwise you're either going to get a developer that gets a number they have to stick to that is unrealistic, or you've got a stakeholder that's kind of overspent and they're like, what? I didn't understand. I thought the cloud was cheap. So that's a kind of a good a segue maybe into what kind of tools are available in AWS to kind of get started. Carlos, how would you suggest people start looking at things and what's available?
That is a good question, and I guess it depends. So if we can start with forecasting, also depends on what sort of forecasting you do, right? Mm-hmm. So I would say, largely speaking, there are two schools of thought when it comes to forecasting. You have what's called a trend-based, or you have what's called a driver-based, right?
Okay.
So the trend-based is something more top-down. Usually it's a forward-looking extrapolation of historical AWS spend data. That's what it is, right? The advantages of this is very easy to implement. More and more is being done by machine learning models. So it's just sit back and relax, right? As you do. However, one of the disadvantages of this option is that it doesn't take into account any sort of business or environmental changes, no? Like right. Something that is not reflected on that data. Things like a new product launch or new feature or any movement in the market, right? So those things are not accounted for. That's the only disadvantage of that. So it's ideal for existing and stable workloads, right? To give you that point. And then just to not to ramble too much on this, driver-based forecasting, second point, is a more bottom-up approach. And what it is a manual calculation of the expected AWS spend of a workload based on the pricing of every single resource within that workload, and also based on their level of expected usage, which is ultimately based on a business driver, right? Business driver meaning either things, for example, a monthly number of active users or the number of expected transactions and whatnot, right? So this one is, advantages is that you want to have more accuracy, right? Because you're trying to be more bottom-up, more specific. However, it may require a lot of effort depending on how you go about it, right? So that's the main disadvantage. And it's ideal for new workloads, right? So obviously those that you don't have any historical data that you can extrapolate. And now, the tools, the moment you've been waiting for. Sorry for the little intro. So for the trend, that's good. All right, good. So for the trend-based forecasting, as I said, machine learning is something that people are doing more and more often. You have in AWS a off-the-box option, which is comes with AWS Cost Explorer, which gives you the option to forecast your spend based on 12 months of historical data, and gives you that sort of prediction range of 80% of accuracy, right? That is simple. You don't have to do nothing. It's just out there as long as you have the data, right, to provide to the model. And I guess also there's other options if you want to be more precise, if you want to have more control on how to train the model, right, and what sort of data you provide into it. You can use something like a fully managed service like Amazon Forecast, right? Something that we also provide. Actually, there's a link that you may see on the screen that is a solution that was posted by one of our solution architect teams on the machine learning blog of AWS. And it talks about how they actually take the curve file as an input into Amazon Forecast to provide obviously the AWS spend forecast. Very interesting solution, very recent post. I recommend you to actually have a look at it.
Yeah, I am. I didn't know that was a solution, even though I've shared the link. But that looks really cool. Do you know? Did they find any kind of significant results when they were looking at it? Do you know if there was anything, or if you had to play with it to find anything that's like really insightful with it?
And not yet, but I have seen, for example, that it allows you to, which is very interesting, it allows you to feed in not only your sort of historical data of what you want to forecast, but also some additional data you might want to include that is more contextual data that can actually make your data more reliable and make your your forecast more accurate in the future, right?
Oh, nice. That's good. Feels like you're saying, I think I say this all the time when it comes to Amazon tools. Like I trust them up to a certain point, and I work here, and I really I really like using them, but it is giving that nuance to the data really allows you to take control and then actually trust the numbers, like Amazon numbers that we give you on recommendations. We have reasons behind it, but as a user, you often want to make sure you know why we recommend them. So having that kind of ability to tweak and manipulate them is that's really cool. I like that. That's awesome. Biddle, when you talk to customers, do you find that they're using the forecasting stuff on Cost Explorer much?
Yeah, I was actually going to say, like, if you're watching this and you're kind of like newer to AWS, or maybe you're not as farther in the maturity cycle and you're kind of at the ledge wanting to jump off, like, help, I can't tune machine learning frameworks. What do I still do with my forecast? I can assure you, one of the easiest solutions that we have available is to get your cost and usage report piped into Amazon QuickSights. And then within Amazon QuickSights, built into that UI, we actually have some options where you can just one-click enable forecast on top of that. And then there's options in there where you can edit the narrative that's driving that forecast using like just adjusting the scripts that are already kind of pre-plugged in from Amazon QuickSights. So you don't necessarily need to be an engineer or developer if you fancy yourself someone that's kind of like a little business analytics savvy, more of a finance professional, really good with Excel. You can jump right into Curta QuickSights and enabling forecast on that. And one example I have is with one of my customers, very large travel industry. They recently acquired another business through their mergers and acquisitions, and they actually just piped in Curta QuickSights on that M&A. And then they realized that one of those business units was running at what looked like about 300% over their budget within like the first 3 months.
Damn.
And that's just from QuickSights out the box on top of the Cur, letting you know where things look like anomalies. So that's my suggestion. Like that's the crawl strategy, the walk strategy. Just start implementing that before you start getting too far down the stack.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that was my suggestion, but we'll work at the same place. So I just shared as well a link to the Well Architected Labs, which you heard me go on about many a time. But in that, there is an element of this dashboard that I think has the kind of the forecasting element to it. And that's a great kind of highlight that, as you said, the more sophisticated, you need to be really granular one that Carlos suggested, really useful if you're starting out. Like just wanting to know, is this application going to go off the rails and start to increase my spend just to get started is a great call out. Cool. So we have the Amazon kind of forecasting stuff, but what about the budgets? Talk to us a bit about budgets, Carlos. How do you recommend people start using those?
Right. So for budgets, it's actually very straightforward. There is a tool that, surprise, surprise, it's called AWS Budgets. And this one is the basic one that you should be looking at. It's a tool that allows you to actually track your AWS spend against a target. And this target is usually based on your forecast, whether that's a forecast itself or it's a forecast plus maybe some sort of cushion that you might implement depending on your company strategy. And also allows you to define a number of intermediate thresholds between 0 and your budget target, right? So you can see how your spend is tracking towards a target, and you can configure a number of potential actions to take as you close into your target, as you reach each of these thresholds. Usually, customers start with simple notifications, right? So you want to drive awareness that you're reaching these thresholds, and you can either do that via alerting individuals or define groups. And also this can be in the form of either emails or Slack channel notifications, for example. This is like the basic tool, right, to use. And then you have something else, something like, for example, AWS cost anomaly detection, which is something much newer. I think it was released last year, if I'm not mistaken. And it's a great complement to AWS budgets, right? So usually they're used together. And this tool uses machine learning to predict the expected level of cost based on your historical AWS spend. So it's very similar to how forecasting works in that sense. And it's constantly measuring the difference between your actual spend and this expected spend to try to
Right.
see whether there's any anomaly, right? That's why the name comes from it. And if once the difference goes beyond a specific threshold that you as a user configure, then obviously it's going to trigger an alert, and it's going to give you also a root cause analysis, so you know exactly where to look at where that anomaly comes from, right? So it is a great tool to detect what you call a needle in a haystack problem that usually you may not be able to see with a normal AWS budget, because the AWS budget numbers may be super large, and these problems can be very incipient, but if you don't catch them right when they happen, they may become something larger, if that makes any sense.
Definitely. Awesome. So I've thrown in some links in the channel just about talking on those things. And one thing, the budget's kind of a notifications concept. I really like the idea that you can email people, and because not everyone has Slack, some people have kind of different put in other name of chat provider here, but the email thing is so useful. But one thing to caveat with it, I remember when I first started setting up budgets, and I just would have DLs for all the teams. And when we set up the budgets, kind of going back to that conversation we had earlier about we were putting in numbers that maybe weren't the right numbers, it meant people were getting notified constantly, and they would just have this wall of notifications that were useless because it obviously meant the numbers weren't accurate for what their budget should be. They were probably too low. It was a random number someone had given somebody else, and then it meant everyone was getting emails, and that is not a good way of setting budgets. These are meant to be used so that you can notify somebody who can then do an action to then fix and remediate so that you don't go over the top of the spend. So just linking back to what we said earlier, if you are setting budgets, please make sure that you A, set the right number, but also B, make sure you know who needs to get that notification. I don't know if either of you have got any kind of good ideas for who should get that. I always think people who can make a change and the person who cares more about the number so they can push someone else to make a change. But Bill, have you seen people kind of react to the budget notification stuff?
Yeah, just real quick, want to jump on a question in the chat. It says, does budgets cost any money? And so you can set up budgets for free within your organization that are just more like insight budgets, like letting you know when something's gone over a certain threshold. But there is a small nominal charge of about 10 cents per day for any sort of automated IAM or service control policy actions that you automate on top of those budget insights. So using budgets is definitely free. It's just if you want to go like master level on top of that and start automating and kind of creating different workflows from that budget insight, that's where you'll start to kind of want to get your strategy in place for how deep you want to go with those. And so to your point, Steph, I think one of the things that we want to just really be clear about too is sometimes customers will bring up budgets and then also alarms and kind of interchange them as one and the same. I recommend a strategy where you use both AWS budgets from Cost Explorer and then also alarms. And then more importantly, I like to have my customers tie up alarms from your CloudWatch metrics in conjunction with budgets that you forecasted for different business units. That way, then you can see on one hand, the usage, like is the light switch on 24/7, right? Is that end kind of going over what you forecasted for your budget? And you can marry that up with, on the other hand, your CloudWatch alarm that's saying, hey, not only are these instances running 24/7, but 50% of them haven't hit over 30% CPU in a 2-week period, right? So that's where you kind of can join those insights together and not just tell someone in engineering, hey, you're turned on all the time. You can actually let them know it's turned on all the time, and there's really not much current running through that light switch. So let's kind of reconfigure how we're optimizing that environment.
Yeah, definitely kind of add more to the data. So we've had a couple of questions in the chat, so I'll just throw those out there. So one from Rob. So every org has an annual forecast budget cycle, but the cloud moves fast. How frequently do you recommend smaller teams using AWS more fully should be budgeting and forecasting their internal benefits? So how regularly, I think that's like how regularly should we be kind of reviewing these? Carlos, what do you recommend when you speak to your customers?
Right, so it is a common practice to do annual forecasts that are revised quarterly and are tracked monthly. That's usually the sort of strategy that you can use. But more and more commonly, customers are using something called a POC-based forecasting. right? And it's something that, as I said before, remember that I said that there's two sort of sources of forecasting, sort of ways of forecasting. So you either do the trend-based or the driver-based. So what you do is you ask your engineering teams directly whenever they put in new workloads into the system to do a driver-based forecasting themselves and to put that on the cloud, not to leverage the experimentation power of the cloud. And that way you start tracking, obviously, that forecast, and you're able to fine tune on a very controlled way the sort of all those new forecasted sort of workloads that you don't have historic data for. So that is a very interesting pattern that we see more and more often with the customers. Hopefully that helped answer the question in a way.
Yeah, definitely. And I like to think of budgets being and cost in general being as important as things like security. So I know that people often have kind of weekly in their sprints, they might have conversations, or if it's 2 week sprint, they might have conversations about how the security is going, like what their numbers are, if they're patched. That was something that my old company that used to talk all about, like what the number of patched instances were. So bringing that conversation of maybe not reviewing the budget, but just kind of keeping an eye on that spend and where things are going in your sprint meetings, in your kind of weekly reviews, just like a 2-minute review of like pull up Cost Explorer, pull up QuickSight, pull up whatever BI tool you have, just have a quick scan. Is everything looking normal? Yeah, okay. Just make sure people are kind of constantly looking at it. And then we had another question, which I think Rob's answered, but we'll show it on here as well. So can you stop AWS services when they run past a threshold? Either of you want to take this one?
Well, I have a funny story
Okay.
that can actually help you highlight why it's important to think about this. A very good question,
Go for it.
by the way. Right. So there's we have a customer that they implemented a Lambda function. Right. As you know, serverless compute engine is supposed to last for short periods of time for specific tasks. And they attached a AWS budgets to it with only notifications to 2 specific individuals. Right. That's what it is. So far, everything sounds good. However, there's a number of things that happen. Number one, the customer did not test the Lambda function properly.
Right.
And so it was going into loops. Okay. So you can imagine, right, a Lambda function, a serverless compute that is built by the millisecond, running on what I want to say eternal basis, because usually they are cut off after 15 minutes, but it is still a long time. 15 minutes of Lambda is 50% more expensive than an EC2 for a whole hour, to give you an idea. So, right. And then the 2 people who were being notified were both out of office. So perfect recipe for, well, what you can imagine, a large bill 6 weeks after they really found out about this. No? So that's and then to answer your question, right, there's 2 ways you can do it. When you have your AWS budgets, your thresholds, there are 2 ways you can configure on these thresholds. You can either configure something called the AWS budgets actions, which is something, again, off the shelf that gives you the ability to do very specific things, but you don't have to know much about how to do them. It's just pretty much changing permissions to avoid, for example, people to spin up more instances. Or you can target specific instances like EC2s or RDS instances to just stop them, to stop billing, right? That's the easy way to do it. But if you have, you have more sort of customized needs, and you want to do something more precise, you can use the SNS notification sort of functionality, which then can trigger Lambda functions that you can write yourself and define exactly what you want to do. No, that's it's a more advanced stage. No, but it's also a way to tackle that problem. Yeah.
Nice. Something to go into detail maybe another time. So we're almost at time. So thank you so much for joining us today, everybody. We covered quite a small bit on budgets and anomaly and forecasting. So I think we might do some more of this in the future. If you want to reach out to Carlos, which is going to pop up an email there, you can get in touch if you're from EMEA and want to learn a little bit more about the budget stuff. And as always, if you want to reach out to us, it's costoptimization@amazon.com. Hope everybody has a great week, and we'll see you next week where we're talking about EBS storage. See you all then.